Those 25% auto tariffs went into effect at midnight on all Canadian-made vehicles.
The president is giving car makers 2 years to move production back to America, and they can apply for...
The U.S. auto industry is collapsing, and it is all because of Ontario. With one quiet move, the border flipped from invisible to brutal. Shipments stalled. Assembly lines froze. Executives scrambled. All because Canada's silent engine stopped absorbing the cost and made America feel its own weight for the first time. So who really pays when a partnership breaks? Why did automakers build billion-dollar systems around a border they never controlled? And was the North American supply chain ever stable? Or just waiting to snap? You're about to find out how Ontario turned cooperation into collapse without raising its voice when seamless borders became weapons. Manufacturing companies in Windsor and Detroit treated the border like a formality. Automobile parts crossed it several times without incident. A steering rack made in Ontario might go to Michigan for installation into a sub-assembly, only to return to Canada for final assembly. It was a ballet of precision, until the rhythm broke. The skyline of Detroit looms just across the river from Windsor. Two cities bound not just by proximity, but by industry, family ties, and rhythm. That rhythm used to be the shift change. The whistles, the foot traffic, the synchronized choreography of an industrial partnership. Now the silence is unsettling. Parking lots that once held thousands of vehicles ready for delivery now lie barren. And with them, nearby parts suppliers, machine shops, and trucking firms are going dark one by one. The average modern vehicle contains approximately 30,000 individual parts. These are sourced, refined, and assembled across hundreds of companies. Just-in-time manufacturing, the gold standard of efficiency, depends entirely on frictionless cross-border logistics. Components often arrive just hours before installation. Any delay creates a cascade. Now that cascade has begun. With a 25% tariff placed on all Canadian manufactured components entering the United States of America, automakers must recalculate every bolt, every bracket. Borders that once enabled production now act as barricades. Proximity, once a benefit, has become a burden. This is not simply Ontario's problem. It is a structural unraveling. The ripple effects are spreading, and they are just beginning. The mathematics of destruction. The automotive industry operates on razor-thin margins, often in the range of 3 to 5%. This math has now become existentially dangerous. At Local 444's Union Hall, Representative Cassandra Williams faced a room full of workers and no easy answers. Coffee cups were clutched tight in calloused hands. Nervous glances darted across tables. Older workers whispered about early retirement. Younger ones already had job listings open on their phones. The numbers told a grim story. A vehicle that cost $30,000 to produce now carried an additional $7,500 in tariff costs. That is a 25% penalty just to cross a border. For vehicles manufactured entirely within Ontario, but destined for American markets, the markup was unsustainable. No consumer would willingly accept it. Executives had three options: absorb the loss, pass it on to consumers, or move production. None were viable. All were destructive. Capital expenditure plans were frozen. Apprenticeship pipelines collapsed. Plants that had once hummed with the promise of long-term employment now stood eerily quiet. Williams was not just defending wages. She was defending the idea that these jobs still mattered, that this work still had value. In boardrooms in Toronto and Detroit, the calculus became clear. Could Ontario's facilities survive this new environment? Would plants in Mexico or the southern United States of America offer insulation from these political storms? The answer was not hopeful. Then came the place where the shock began to spread outward. Windsor's silent prophecy. Windsor, Ontario, the automotive capital of Canada, and the first to fall. Stellantis shut down its Windsor assembly plant for what it called a 2-week adjustment. That was 4 months ago. Today, the factory remains idle. 3,500 workers were sent home. There is no date for their return, no roadmap, no answers. What started as a brief pause stretched into a quiet erasure. General Motors announced that its Cami plant would halt operations through the summer, possibly longer. Honda canceled a planned electric vehicle expansion in Alliston. Ontario's automotive heart was failing, not from neglect but from sudden, overwhelming trauma. In the neighborhood surrounding the plants, the collapse was not theoretical. It was immediate. The late-night diners closed first, then the daycare centers, then the tutoring programs. The economic pain moved fast, like a power outage rippling through a city block. This was not just economic loss, it was identity loss. Town halls filled with questions that had no comforting answers. Should we leave Windsor? Should we retrain for something completely different? Will these plants ever hum again? The city had seen hard times. But this was different. This was deeper. What lies ahead is not just economic confusion. It is a supply chain implosion, where every cog in the machine faces collapse. And we trace the entire collapse. Every policy, every dollar, every job lost, so you know what really happened, not just what made headlines. If that's worth something, give back with a quick subscribe. Built to be seamless, weaponized overnight. Your vehicle is not assembled in one place. It is built, disassembled, and reassembled as its components cross borders multiple times, gaining value with each pass. At least that was the design, a carefully calibrated machine of continental integration. Now that same system has become its own worst enemy. Alejandro Reyes, a supply chain director based in Leamington, knows this better than most. He traces the journey of a single transmission unit. The aluminum housing is cast in Indiana. It travels to Ontario for machining. Gears from Michigan are inserted. The near-complete unit is assembled in Mexico, then returns to Ontario for installation into the final vehicle. Eventually, that car is sold in the United States of America. In total, that transmission crosses a national border at least 6 times. Before the tariffs, this was a marvel of efficiency. With a 25% tariff applied at each crossing, it is now a financial disaster. What once added value now adds cost, compounding, suffocating cost. Ontario's auto parts sector ships approximately $40 billion worth of goods annually. Half of it heads directly to the United States of America. The other half supports Canadian vehicle assembly. Now every shipment is subject to multiple layers of bureaucracy and levies. The most advanced, efficient supply chain on the continent has been turned into a logistical minefield overnight. Executives who once optimized for speed are now scrambling to redesign for survival. Alejandro looks at his spreadsheets, at the red ink spreading across once profitable lanes, and realizes the very system they mastered has become an anchor. The complexity was always hidden beneath the surface. Now that surface is cracking, revealing just how fragile the entire structure has become. The ballet company performing underwater. Imagine asking a ballet company to perform underwater. That is how one analyst described it. Every motion takes more energy. Every action is distorted. That is the new reality for Ontario's auto sector. Wei Chen, an industry analyst based in Markham, observed the initial weeks of the tariff shock as companies scrambled for solutions. Warehouses filled up within days. Some manufacturers tried to stockpile parts ahead of time, only to find that storage space had become both limited and expensive. Documentation requirements also changed. A part that previously needed minimal paperwork now required full classification. Was a partially assembled dashboard a part or a component? Did it qualify as finished goods? Each designation triggered a different tariff category. Errors meant delays. Delays meant idle production lines. Shipping costs soared. Emergency air freight was deployed to keep assembly lines moving. Rates rose by more than 40% in some regions. Trucking firms had to renegotiate contracts with clients daily as wait times at border crossings doubled. One misfiled form could hold an entire shipment. These additional expenses could not be passed on to customers. They had to be absorbed or offset. That meant layoffs, reduced shifts, canceled orders. As one logistics manager put it, "We designed this system to be just in time. Now it feels more like just in case." What used to be a dance of industrial timing has become a disjointed struggle for survival, emergency measures and desperate solutions. The crisis did not just change shipping routes, it changed mindsets. Desperation replaced discipline. Companies that once prided themselves on lean operations are now hoarding inventory, duplicating processes, and burning through cash reserves. Thomas Wilson, operations director at Precision Components in Lamington, explains that they used to ship fittings daily, a perfect balance of production and demand. Now they manufacture in large batches, not because it is efficient, but because border delays make daily delivery impossible. Storage costs have exploded. Warehouses in border towns are at 95% capacity. Many are turning away new clients. Wilson has rented third-party units several hours away, adding transportation costs and delays. Meanwhile, his own suppliers face similar issues upstream. Efficiency has dropped by 18% since the tariffs began. What used to be a synchronized pipeline is now a chain of bottlenecks. Industry analysts predict that between 20 and 30% of Ontario's smaller automotive suppliers will not survive another 6 months if current conditions persist. They are too small to absorb the losses, too integrated to pivot, too vital to ignore. This is not just a shipping crisis. It is an extinction-level event for small and mid-sized players in the supply chain. As the weight of emergency logistics crushes the industry's smallest shoulders, something more dangerous is brewing across the border checkpoints when cooperation becomes competition. The border crossings between Ontario and Michigan were never meant to be battlegrounds. Yet that is what they have become. Daily, over $100 million in vehicles and parts used to flow across those checkpoints. The system operated on cooperation, even among competitors. Sharing space, sharing knowledge, sharing labor pools. That unspoken agreement made North America the world's most efficient vehicle manufacturer. Now it is eroding. Customs officials are overwhelmed. New documentation rules require time, training, and interpretation. Some shipments are flagged without explanation. Others are delayed for hours. The queues stretch for miles. For decades, the model was co-opetition, collaborative competition. Companies relied on each other's strengths to produce better vehicles. Parts were designed to fit across multiple brands. A delay for one was a setback for all. That model no longer works. Companies are now isolating processes, rewriting supply deals, cutting joint ventures. Where there was once trust, there is now suspicion. Across the Atlantic Ocean, manufacturers in Germany, Japan, and South Korea are watching closely. While North America fragments, they are streamlining. They are expanding. They are benefiting. The cracks in the system are no longer hidden. They are growing wider by the day. The next blow will not come from across the ocean. It is coming from within the industry itself as internal pressure mounts and external options vanish. Kitchen table crisis management. The middle class was not just squeezed, it was targeted. Daniel and Marianne Kovich did not expect to become accidental financial planners overnight. Their kitchen table had become a crisis command center. Notebooks with scribbled budgets, laptops open to banking apps, stacks of unopened mail pushed to the side. It had only been 3 days since Daniel's layoff from the parts plant. Already the foundation of their life was starting to crack. Mortgage payments totaled $2,100 each month. Employer-sponsored health care would expire in 30 days. Their daughter Sarah was set to begin university that autumn. The family had planned for tuition, but not for all of this. Their backup savings, which once felt sufficient, now looked dangerously small. Daniel had worked in the same factory for 17 years. His father had worked there before him. Stability was not just an expectation, it was a belief, one that now felt naive. Across Ontario, thousands of families were mirroring this routine, checking the numbers, cutting expenses, wondering whether to sell cars, cancel vacations, or withdraw education savings plans. At Windsor Regional Hospital, administrators began preparing for the wave. Families without health care were expected to defer treatments. Mental health service providers reported a 40% surge in appointment requests. This was not just about factories. The industrial fallout was spreading across kitchens, clinics, and classrooms. The silence of the factory floor had echoed all the way home. But it was the conversations around the kitchen table that revealed how deep the damage ran. Dreams deferred, futures uncertain. Francis Liberty High School had prepared its graduating class for college, trades, or the workforce, but they were not prepared for this. Guidance counselor Anita Bradshaw now spent her days rewriting futures. Seniors who had spent 4 years building their resumes and portfolios were now reconsidering everything. For many, the family fallback was gone. Parents who once promised tuition support were suddenly unemployed. Students who had secured spots at colleges in Toronto or Ottawa were instead exploring cheaper community programs. Some were deferring their admissions entirely. Anita sat across from a 17-year-old student who asked if a factory job might be safer than university. It was a question she had not heard in a generation. Outside the school, the Windsor-Essex Food Bank was operating at double its normal capacity. Volunteers recognized many of the new faces. They were parents still wearing branded jackets from local plants. They had gone from donors to recipients in the span of weeks. The Windsor-Essex School District announced classroom consolidations. Enrollment was projected to drop by 7% before the new academic year. When parents relocate for work, they take their children with them. When families lose income, they delay relocation entirely. Either way, the schools were preparing for fewer students and fewer resources. Education was not collapsing, but it was being rearranged by economic gravity, community fabric unraveling. Millennium Coffee had served night shift workers for 15 years. Jasmine Wong opened the cafe with her husband in 2008, 2 blocks from the Windsor plant. The place had always been full after midnight, techs, machinists, and welders crowding the counter before heading home. That crowd had vanished. After the second round of shift reductions, night sales dropped by 60%. Then came the layoffs. Jasmine held on for 6 weeks, but when rent came due, the math no longer worked. She locked the doors on a Thursday morning. Her dream, like so many others, ended not with ceremony but with silence. Downtown Windsor was changing. Storefronts that had been family-run for generations now had for lease signs taped to the glass. The loss of manufacturing had begun a chain reaction that no business could outrun. The city finance director projected an $18 million shortfall in tax revenue. Lower property values and closed commercial properties meant less money for public services. Emergency budget meetings led to delayed road maintenance, reduced community center hours, and fewer public transit routes. This was not just a business cycle, it was a civic unraveling. Each lost job took with it 7 other livelihoods: the grocer, the daycare worker, the mechanic, the bus driver. Windsor was learning the hard way that prosperity is shared, but so is devastation. The ripple effect accelerates. The factory closures were the epicenter, but the shockwaves did not stop there. Liam Wilson, operations manager at Crown Logistics, stood in front of his parking lot and counted the idled rigs. 20% of the company's transport fleet was now offline. With fewer parts to move and fewer finished vehicles to deliver, demand had collapsed. 38 drivers had been laid off. Most had specialized certifications that would expire within months if not used. If those drivers left the industry, Crown would not be able to bring them back without costly retraining. Eastwood Mall reported a 25% drop in foot traffic. Retailers that depended on steady paychecks from manufacturing workers were now operating at a loss. Some had already begun reducing store hours. Others were planning to close entirely. Approximately 4.5% of Ontario's total employment was directly tied to automobile production, but the indirect impact was far greater. Across affected postal codes, unemployment claims surged by 37%. Banks began monitoring mortgages in manufacturing-dependent neighborhoods. Early signs of defaults appeared on internal watch lists. Financial institutions were bracing for a wave they could not stop, only manage. Ontario was not just losing jobs, it was losing momentum, community anchors, and in some cases, hope. What came next would depend on whether anyone could rebuild from the wreckage or whether the collapse would define an entire generation. Silver linings in economic crisis. When does temporary shock become permanent transformation? The answer is usually buried in the numbers. For Ontario, those numbers are beginning to tell a story few expected. Windsor's advanced manufacturing corridor, a long-term concept once relegated to brochures and committee meetings, is suddenly real. Underutilized industrial properties are being repurposed. Former plants are now housing smaller, more flexible operations, specializing in niche production. The goal is no longer scale. It is adaptability. Jason Rodriguez, the city's Director of Economic Development, walks through one such facility now producing precision medical tools. The same floor once filled with engine blocks is now clean, compact, and filled with bright white plastic components and soft pneumatic arms. Ontario's vehicle sector may be losing ground, but its manufacturing core remains skilled and scalable. Precision machining, quality assurance, and advanced robotics are proving transferable. Aerospace components, medical instruments, and clean energy systems are now attracting interest. Even with tariffs in place, certain high-value components can be exported with fewer penalties than finished vehicles. The new economic logic favors depth over volume. Projections still warn of long-term job loss. Under the most optimistic scenarios, Ontario is expected to lose 12,000 positions permanently. Pessimistic models point to losses in the range of 30 to 40%. But alongside those projections, another possibility is emerging. The collapse may have done what 2 generations of economic strategy could not: force a complete reimagining of Ontario's industrial identity. The battery revolution accelerates. Stellantis has not abandoned Windsor entirely. Instead, its executives have begun redirecting the city's role. Rather than producing for North American distribution, Windsor may now serve primarily Canadian markets. This would preserve roughly 40% of its capacity, though with a significantly reduced workforce and a narrower operational scope. Fewer assembly lines, but more focused output. That is the new reality. Michelle Rodriguez, a lead strategist for manufacturing transition, explains that the model of mass production built around the lowest cost per unit is already obsolete. Now the focus is on modularity, specialized platforms, faster reconfiguration. The future of manufacturing is flexible, and Windsor must adapt quickly or be left behind. Most of all, it is about batteries. Ontario has attracted approximately $44 billion in new investments tied to electric vehicle development. These are not speculative commitments. They are breaking ground, hiring engineers, laying cable, installing machines. Battery supply chains are forming across southern Ontario. not just around one company, but through a network of partnerships, universities, and global manufacturers looking for a post-tariff North American foothold. PowerCo, a subsidiary of a major European automaker, has broken ground on its first North American battery cell facility, just outside Kingston. The facility will specialize in advanced lithium iron phosphate cells and solid-state research. It is expected to support 5,000 direct and indirect jobs and establish Eastern Ontario as a critical node in the continent's clean tech corridor. Meanwhile, General Motors has accelerated the expansion of its Electric Development Center in Oshawa, shifting engineering teams from internal combustion optimization to battery management systems, software integration, and range efficiency design. It is not just a retooling, it is a reset. Legacy teams are being reassigned. Job descriptions are being rewritten. Engineering schools are being asked to reorient entire curriculums to fit this new reality. Completed vehicles face the heaviest tariffs under current trade policy. Components, especially those involving intellectual property, face less resistance. As a result, Ontario's future may lie not in building entire vehicles, but in mastering their most valuable and complex parts. Energy density, charging cycles, thermal performance. That is where Ontario may dominate. The storm did not destroy every path forward. It merely blocked the one everyone was used to taking. Now the province is cutting new paths. Fewer vehicles, but smarter ones. Less bulk steel, more silicon. Educational institutions rising to challenge. Jason Mueller, a 26-year-old former technician at a Honda supplier, never expected to go back to school. Yet here he is, seated in a Sheridan College classroom, learning programmable logic control systems with classmates who, like him, were laid off before they could finish paying off their first car loan. It is not just about skill development, it is about reinvention. Aisha Chaudhry, once a production assistant, has enrolled in the college's automation program. She used her severance to pay the first term. She has 2 children at home and commutes 1 hour each way. There is no job guarantee waiting, but there is potential. Her gamble is not on a specific factory, but on becoming too skilled to be left behind. Ontario's technical colleges are seeing a surge in applicants from displaced workers. Compressed training programs are being launched to meet demand. Micro-credentialing, weekend courses, remote learning modules. The system is adapting at a speed rarely seen in public education. Administrators are partnering directly with industry to create employment pipelines that did not exist 3 months ago. The provincial government has accelerated funding approvals for apprenticeship reforms. Older workers face more challenges: limited digital literacy, family obligations, and geographic immobility. But the institutional will to accommodate them is building. There are new night classes, transportation stipends, on-site child care pilots. Ontario's education sector is treating this like a war effort. At the university level, manufacturing partnerships are evolving. Research once focused on traditional tooling is now targeting additive manufacturing, energy systems, and robotics integration. Where once there were grants for engine design, now there are labs working on battery chemistry and smart assembly environments. The pipeline of innovation is growing, not shrinking. In quiet moments, many students admit they no longer see the auto industry as their end goal. They see it as one phase in a wider journey, a stepping stone, a launch pad. The emotional attachment to a single company or sector is being replaced by a more fluid sense of career. From dependency to diversification, Ontario's recovery is not guaranteed, but the shape it is beginning to take is radically different from its past. The province built its post-war prosperity on volume manufacturing. Now it may be forced to rebuild it on precision, agility, and specialization. In Sarnia, a group of former workers have launched a cooperative focused on small-scale agricultural machinery. They are using existing fabrication tools to produce modular tilling and irrigation systems for small farms. Orders are small, but consistent. They control their schedule. They own their designs. In Guelph, a startup is using displaced robotics engineers to prototype waste sorting systems for municipal recycling plants. The machines are simple. The need is constant. They are currently negotiating with 4 mid-sized cities. These are not side projects. They are survival plans. Some workers believe a political reversal is the only path back to prosperity. Others are building new identities from the ground up. The divide is stark, but both responses speak to the same truth. The old model is not coming back on its own, and those waiting for the past to return may miss the future already arriving. Royal Bank economist Priya Sharma notes that the financial indicators now match structural transition, not cyclical recovery. Growth projections for the province have been revised downward. What was once forecast as modest expansion is now predicted to flatline or contract. That is the official outlook. Look, Ontario's collapse shattered certainty, but sparked something else: reinvention. From church basements to machine shops, a new future is being built. What do you see ahead? Drop a comment, and thank you for watching.